Christine Gilbert was born to two loving parents, Richard and Claudia Strickland, in Fall River, Massachusetts, on November 13, 1967. She was the eldest, with only one other sister. Her parents worked hard to provide for her father an electronics executive, and her mother a homemaker and part-time teacher. As she grew older, it became very apparent that she had an affinity for lying. Her telling the truth seemed to be something of fiction, as she would fake suicides just to receive attention and lull people into caring for her. If that didn't work, she was known to threaten them with violence. All of these things manifested in her teenage years. Of course, she would go on to graduate from Groton Dewstable High School in 1986, and she would further her education enrolling at Bridgewater State College. Not long after being enrolled, she was given psychiatric treatment for committing a fake suicide attempt. It was because of this that she was transferred to two separate schools in 1987. She was first moved to Mount Wachusett Community College in Gardner, Massachusetts, and shortly after that, she was transferred for the second time to Greenfield Community College. It was at Greenfield where she would seemingly attempt to get her life together as she graduated with a nursing diploma and became an RN in 1988. In that same year, she would marry Glenn Gilbert. 10 years after her marriage, she was put on staff at VAMC in Northampton. Not long after she was employed, the other nurses began to take notice of a high number of deaths of patients under her watch. They jokingly referred to her as the Angel of Death. It wasn't until 1996
I wore thermal pants and shirt, wool socks, a balaclava, mask, all that shit.
Pattern. There was a large number of casualties caused by cardiac arrest, and the supply of epinephrine had dropped drastically.
It was actually kinda hot during the car rides, LOLO, and I wore snow pants.
Can be known to cause cardiac arrest.
Check this, guy sent you a cool pic of something I wanna buy.
The investigation began.
Also, BRB, quick, gotta take a dump.
Put underway in the fall, Gilbert left VAMC and checked herself into psychiatric hospitals 7 times. Each time, she would only stay for 1 to 10 days. Later in January of 1998, she would also call in a bomb threat to the hospital in hopes of derailing the investigation and trying to retaliate against those who helped with the investigation. In April of '98, she was finally convicted for the act. It was also around this time her husband and her divorced. During her trial, hospital staff alleged that she was responsible for over 80 deaths and more than 300 medical emergencies. She would inject the patient's IVs with epinephrine and walk away. Later, when another nurse would accompany her with her nightly walks, is when concern was raised. She would refuse to use defibrillator paddles, and in one case, this forced an untrained nurse to do so. Despite the allegations of over 80 murders, she was only convicted on 3 counts of murder in the first degree, 1 count of murder in the second degree, and 2 counts of attempted murder. While Massachusetts doesn't have a death penalty, the crimes were committed on federal property, which opened up the doors for it to be a possibility. The prosecutors in her case brought up things like past offenses and the bomb threat, hoping to receive the death penalty charge. However, the defense brought up the well-being of her children.
Do you watch Dark Viper?
Ultimately, on March 27, 2001, the jury sentenced her to 4 consecutive life terms with no possibility of parole. Jodi Arias' case has gone down in history as one of the most disturbing of all time. There are many reasons for this, which we'll get into, but first we need to talk about who she is and where she came from.
Oh well, he's doing a pacifist playthrough of GTA VRN, and he's been doing the same mission for over 24 hours now. It's crazy.
And 2 sisters.
Pacifist is where you can't kill anyone.
Since her childhood, which was notably tame aside from some allegations of abuse, she was interested in photography. However, she wasn't able to pursue this passion right away.
So he's trying all different ways to beat this mission.
In high school, Jodi dropped out. From there, she worked many odd jobs while continuing to pursue photography. Her first relationship was with Daryl Brewer, the food and beverage manager at Ventana Inn and Spa in Carmel, California. They began dating in 2003, however, due to some financial disagreements and Jody's newfound faith in the Mormon Church, the relationship eventually ended.
WHP.
Jody became careless with her money, and the house she was staying in was foreclosed the following year. It was in September of 2006 that Aria met the man she would eventually murder. Found photography. However, she wasn't able to pursue this passion right away. Her junior year at Rica Union High School, Jody dropped out. From there, she worked many odd jobs while continuing to pursue photography. Her first relationship was with Daryl Brewer, the food and beverage manager at Ventana Inn and Spa in Carmel, California. They began dating in 2003, however, due to some financial disagreements and Jody's newfound faith in the Mormon Church, the relationship eventually ended. Jody became careless with her money, and the house she was staying in was foreclosed the following year. It was in September of 2006 that Aria met the man she would eventually murder. And that man was Travis Alexander.
It's possible, dude, but not like completely, cause there's some missions where you have to kill at least one or more PPL to pass it, or it just won't work.
As well as a motivational speaker.
Watch his stream, and it's crazy.
Working in sales and also focusing on her photography career. Their love for each other grew quickly, and according to reports, over 82,000 emails were exchanged between the two. On November 26, 2006, Jody was even baptized in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to get closer to Alexander, who was a devout Mormon. Even so, the relationship only lasted 4 months before ending in June of 2007. According to her, the relationship came to an end because Travis was abusive and wanted her to be his personal slave. She also alleged that he was having an affair. While they were split, Travis began seeing other women and told his friends that he believed Jody was stalking him. He said multiple times that he was worried that she had hacked his Facebook account, bank accounts, and even snuck into his house through the doggy door while he was sleeping. The demented and strange behavior came to a head on June 2, 2008. Jody had moved back to California after her roommate married and she could no longer stay there. On the night of June 2nd, reports show that she rented a car and drove to Travis's house in Mesa. She took many photos of them having sex and even a few while he was taking a shower. These may look familiar. These photos have gone down in history as some of the most disturbing of all time because they are the final moments of Travis's life. Right there in his bathroom, Jody stabbed him 27 times and severed his neck. On June 4th, she drove back home
women
on a
killers
rental car,
or women
and it
killers?
wasn't until June 9th
LOL.
that Travis's body was found and reported. Weeks following this discovery, Arias would attend memorial services for Travis and even wrote about him on her MySpace, continuing to claim that she had nothing to do with it. However, as the investigation continued, the police found the photos of her and Travis with the date stamped in the corner, as well as a bloody handprint with her DNA. On July 9, 2008, she was formally charged with first-degree murder and given life without possibility of parole.
The court finds the mitigation presented is not sufficiently substantial to call for leniency and that a natural life sentence is appropriate. It is ordered the defendant shall be incarcerated in the Department of Corrections for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
Not much can be found about Kelly's childhood online simply because her crime was so recent. It's also one of the most disturbing cases on this list. She was already serving a life sentence for killing her lover back in 2014. However, in 2016, she confessed to killing her husband as well. She claimed that she injected him with heroin and then suffocated him with a pillow. The story gets far worse, however. On her Facebook page, she made posts talking about how his death is one of the hardest things she's ever had to deal with, and even held a memorial service where she brought barbecue for everyone to eat. Her husband's body was never found, and an investigation discovery documentary believes that they know why. The documentary is supposed to have many interviews with loved ones and family members and will talk about how it's believed she may have killed a total of 9 individuals. The documentary also alludes to the belief that she served her husband at the barbecue we spoke of earlier. As of this writing, the documentary hasn't been released, so I have no way of knowing if this is true. As we said, she was already serving a life sentence, but with the second murder charge, she was given an extra 65 years. Susan Smith was born September 26, 1971, and suffered a very troubled home life. Her father took his own life when she was only 6 years old, and she attempted to do the same at age 13. Her mother would remarry sometime down the road. However, this man molested Susan while she was a teenager. One newspaper even claimed that the molestation continued up until 6 months before Susan's crimes were committed. Smith made a second attempt at taking her own life after she graduated high school in 1989. Eventually, she would marry a man named David Smith, and they would have 2 sons together. From the beginning, however, the relationship was shaky. Both accused the other of infidelity and argued constantly. It was on October 25, 1994, that Susan reported to the police that her car had been hijacked with her 2 sons inside. When asked if she knew who did it, she claimed it to be an African-American male. 9 days passed with press coverage of Susan and her husband pleading
Are you
for
paying the
safe return of
subscription
their
to play
children.
WoW?
However, later into the investigation, detectives began poking holes into her original story. The second day into the investigation, Smith and her husband were subject to a polygraph test.
Cool.
However, it was her description of the location of the crime that really set in stone the belief that she had more to do with their disappearances than she originally claimed. Her claim was that the traffic light was red, leading her to stop at a fairly empty intersection. Later, it was deduced that the light wouldn't have been red, seeing as there were no other cars there on the intersecting road. From this information and her confession on November 3rd, they searched John D. Long Lake and located her car, along
In
with the bodies
RuneScape
of
and
her 2
Ozers there is
sons.
a F2P servers
had
you
allowed her
don't gotta
car to
pay
roll
mems
into
you
the
can
lake
only
with her
train
sons
half the
inside.
skills and quests and yada
As you would
yada but it's
imagine,
really
Susan's
cool and
defense
fun.
psychologist argued that she wasn't in a stable state of mind, and while she was diagnosed with dependent personality disorder and major depression, she was sentenced to life imprisonment with a possibility of parole in 30 years. Melanie McGuire was born in Ridgewood, New Jersey on October 8, 1972. In 1990, she
I
graduated
even got
at the
a
top
F2P
5%
only
of her
ACC
class.
just for fun cause
On
it's
top of
harder
that,
to
she
train
was a
all your
member of the
skills really
National
high
Honor
without
Society,
mems.
as well as the Spanish National Honor Society. She was clearly very smart and used that to further her education by going to Rutgers University and obtaining a bachelor's degree with studies in statistics as well as psychology in 1994. Later in 1997, she received her nursing diploma from the Charles E. Gregory School of Nursing. She entered into the OBGYN field and would go on to marry William T. McGuire in 1999. It was in April 2004 when her story begins to become one of the most disturbing on the list. Melanie and her husband were staying at an apartment complex located in Woodbridge, New Jersey. The family had plans of moving to a larger place that same month and even closed on a new house, but never moved in. April 28th, the same night they signed off on the house, Melanie drugged her husband and shot him to death and then dismembered his body. Following this horrific murder, she placed the body parts in 3 separate suitcases and spread them across Chesapeake Bay. The next day, she began building an alibi and claimed that her husband and her had gotten into an argument in which he got physical. According to her, he slapped her and shoved a dryer sheet into her mouth before storming off. 2 days after this claim, his car was found outside a motel in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Less than a week later, the first suitcase was discovered and the investigation was opened. May 11th of 2004, the second suitcase was found, and 5 days later, the third. Police released a composite sketch of the man, and a friend immediately recognized it as William McGuire. The investigation then turned to Melanie. While she vehemently denied any involvement, the evidence was stacked highly against her. The police had contained video of her parking her husband's car at the motel it was found at. She claimed it to be a prank, however, police highly doubted this given the alleged abuse she'd reported before. Furthermore, Melanie purchased a .38 caliber handgun in Pennsylvania along with wad cutter bullets. These are bullets normally reserved for shooting paper targets at close range, however, they're very popular in self-defense weapons like the handgun used. While police didn't find the handgun, they knew that her husband had been killed by the same type of ammunition. Furthermore, it's believed she was engaging in an affair with a co-worker at the fertility clinic she was employed at. This connection could have also been how she received the drugs to carry out the murder. Finally, the 3 suitcases that were found matched the set she had in her basement. The final nail in the coffin was when the police saw that the set was missing the pieces that were the same size as the ones her husband were found in. On April 23, 2007, she was convicted of murder in the first degree, a life sentence, possession of a weapon for unlawful purpose, a second life sentence, desecrating
That's what I was saying,
remains,
LOL.
10 years, and perjury, 5 years. The only motive she gave for the murder was to have a
Dude, have
relationship
you heard
with
of
her
Edmund
coworker,
Kemper?
Bradley Miller.
The serial killer.
How do you find us to the count of the indictment charging Melanie McGuire with the murder of William McGuire between on or about April 28, 2004 and on or about May 5, 2004 in the township of Woodbridge, Middlesex County, New Jersey, elsewhere and within the jurisdiction of this court?
Guilty.
How do you find us to the count of the indictment charging Melanie McGuire with desecrating human...
I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to drop a like and subscribe with notifications.
Dude, he's a cool one. He was 6'9". He was a fucking giant, and he's the one who helped the cops and shit understand and profile serial killers, cause back in the day they didn't know shit about how to identify them and such.
Forced and
My mom
untrained
likes him a
nurse
lot,
to do so.
LOL.
Despite the allegations of over 80 murders, she was only convicted on 3 counts of murder in the first degree, 1 count of murder in the second degree, and 2 counts. Throughout the course of this year, I want to talk about cold cases from every state in the United States. I'll be going through alphabetically until we've covered all of them. In between these videos, I'll have plenty of others from different countries.
Dude
so
killed
sure
a
to
bunch
keep an
of
eye
teenage
out for
hikers
those.
and raped their bodies
With that
and shit.
said,
He did it cause his
begin our
mom was
journey
so
to
abusive to
Alabama
him and made him
with
feel
5
like shit.
Heartbreaking cold cases. Not much can be found online.
He ended
about
up killing
AC
his
and
mother,
his
then
wife,
calling
Carolyn,
cops from a
simply
payphone and turning
because
himself
they were
in.
very quiet and went about their life without bothering others. They had each other, and that seems to be all they needed. AC was a World War II veteran, and his wife ran a local church. The couple was rather well off, but they were sent to share the wealth on a regular basis. Captain Hart, who works with the Tuscaloosa Violent Crimes Unit, said the murders have remained a stain on the community since it took place. The murder begins 29 years back, on October 19, 1989. A volunteer fire department made their way to the Worthy's house in McCalla on Highway 216 after receiving the call. When they arrived, the house was nearly destroyed. The fire had engulfed the entirety of it, and the damage caused by it was devastating. This, coupled with the water damage from putting the fire out, left little to no evidence. Police believe this is exactly what the killer or killers wanted. When the couple's body were found, police were shocked to discover the cause of death wasn't smoke inhalation, but a gunshot wound. Despite the lack of evidence, police were able to piece together a small chain of events. Carolyn was a choir director at their local church, and the two had just returned home from a late-night service. Considering both of the Worthies were known to carry large amounts of money on them, the crime could have been monetarily motivated. But 29 years later, police simply do not know. Given the way the crime was executed, it's believed the individual or individuals involved knew the couple closely, perhaps a friend or a relative, someone they believe they could have trusted. Then again, it would be nearly impossible to see if there was forced entry. The reason I continue to say there could have been multiple individuals involved is because of the strange similarities to another crime taking place in Florida. Only 9 months before the Worthies were killed, another elderly couple were shot to death in their home in Graceville, Florida. The couple was Robert McCrae, who was 72, and his wife Catherine, aged 70. They too were very well off and could have been targeted because of this. In the McCrae case, there was far more evidence, although not enough to build a suspect profile. The main piece was the 2 ski masks found near the back door of the home. They were discovered by a young man who found it very strange and reported it to police. While they investigated, the couple were found dead, shot to death in a similar fashion of the Worthies. The key differences in these cases are that Catherine was thumb-cuffed behind her back, and of course, the house wasn't set ablaze. Despite this, the police strongly believe the cases are connected. Despite the towns of Graceville, Florida and Tuscaloosa, Alabama being 4 hours apart, means nothing if the guilty party was trying to build a distance between themselves and the original crime. Both of the cases remain unsolved to this day, and no other similar crimes have been reported. If you're aware of anything that can help bring the truth to light, please contact the Tuscaloosa Violent Crimes Unit at 205-464-8690. You can also submit tips for the Florida case at 850-482-9648. Given how recent this case is, there isn't much to cover. However, I feel it is very important to cover recent cases. As of writing and editing this, it is early February, so I apologize if I've missed any recent developments. With that said, the case of Floyd Nelson and David Stadman begins in Mobile, Alabama. The 2 men were believed to be fishing in Mobile Bay when their boat overturned in January of 2019. Floyd, who was 83, and David, who was 40, have still not been found. According to the United States Coast Guard, they received a report around 6:30 p.m. about a 22-foot white John boat. Floyd and David were planned to be back around 9 a.m. that morning, but never returned. Hopes are still high, however, and involved in this search are a helicopter crew, a boat crew, the Mobile County Sheriff's Flotilla, Daphne Research and Rescue, the local PD, Coast Guard Aviation, and Alabama Marine Resources. Daniela was only 24 years old when she went missing from Mobile, Alabama in July of 2018. She was last seen on surveillance camera in a Shell gas station on Government Boulevard near I-65. At 24 years old, Daniela was doing very well for herself. She was a waitress at a local P.F. Chang's and had managed to save up enough money to purchase a new car, a dark blue 2014 Chevrolet Cruze. The night she went missing, her car still had the temporary tags. The circumstances of her disappearance have left many scratching their heads. It begins with Daniela planning to celebrate her buying a car with a handful of friends. She went out to a bar where a friend of hers, Randy Capps, was bartending. It was later determined that she was accompanied by a woman and a man. The woman's name hasn't been released, but the man's name is Denson White. According to reports, Vian and the couple were not close friends. Daniela made plans with Randy to hang out with the group after his shift was over. He agreed, and the group left to a different bar. Randy sent a text to Daniela letting him know he was ready, and in separate cars, Randy, Daniela, Denson, and the unidentified woman began heading to a new bar. Before reaching their destination, Denson and Daniela stopped at the Shell gas station we spoke of before. Here, Daniela told Denson her phone was missing, and she believed she'd forgotten it at the previous bar. According to a close friend, Julie, this wasn't very strange for Daniela. She often forgot her phone. It was then Denson and Daniela left the gas station and headed to the previous bar to locate Daniela's phone. According to Denson, he walked in, received the phone for her, and came back out. Daniela was nowhere to be seen. She hadn't pulled in with him, and he said he last saw her riding behind him in her new car. He waited for around 20 minutes, but she never showed up. That was when he joined the rest of the group at the third bar. The following morning at 7:30, Denson called Julie and explained to her that he had her phone and was wondering how he could get it back to her. She explained that Daniela worked at P.F. Chang's and to drop it off there. He did just that. Julie wouldn't think anything of it until 8 p.m. that night. Her and Daniela had made plans together, and her not showing up was very suspicious. On Friday, the following morning, Denson called Julie again, explaining he still had Daniela's phone. Julie said she was headed to the police station to file a missing persons report and to meet her there. He did and gave his statement to police. Over the past 7 months, no new leads have been found. Daniela's car and personal belongings have still not been located. Her friends and family have put forth continued efforts to find her and keep her memory alive. They started up a blog and a Facebook page dedicated to finding her, as well as placing numerous flyers all over Mobile. It has never been said, from what I can find, if Daniela was intoxicated when she got back into the car, but if she was, she could have wrecked. Depending on where it took place, it could be incredibly hard to find her or the car. Bear in mind, I'm not saying she was intoxicated, I'm just throwing a theory out there. If she didn't crash, she could have missed a turn and gotten lost. When stopping to ask for directions, she could have met with the wrong person. Again, just theorizing. If you have any information you believe could aid investigators, please do not hesitate to contact the Mobile Police Department of Alabama at 251-208-1700. They're offering a $5,000 reward to anyone whose tip leads to Daniela being found. It was June 6, 1984, that tragedy struck the town of Greenville, Alabama. That was the day 12-year-old Sherry Lynn Marlar went missing. It begins early that morning around 9:30 with Sherry and her stepfather Raymond. The two were running errands together, beginning at the First National Bank in Greenville. While there, Sherry said she wanted a soda. Her stepfather handed her $1 and sent her across the street to a gas station to get one. When he returned to his truck and saw she wasn't there, he waited for a few minutes. When she still hadn't come back, he called his wife hoping she'd seen her. She had not. That brief moment at the bank was the last time she was seen. The search was put underway immediately, but she still has never been found. 35 years later, there have only been a handful of supposed sightings of Sherry. The first was in Georgia at a truck stop and another at a mall in Louisiana. Both times she was described as looking confused and disheveled. There was a man with her whom she referred to as BJ, and he's been described as a husky man in his 50s and 5 foot 8 inches tall. None of the sightings had substantial evidence, and so the police have thrown them out. Sherry's father has since passed away, but her mother continues searching for her, and police are still taking tips. If you believe you have a tip that could lead to Sherry being found, contact the Greenville Police at 334-382-7461. September 16th, 2002, Alabama police were called to a small trailer in Heflin, Alabama. Inside, they would find a gruesome scene. It had been a few days since any family had heard from either Monica or Dalton, and so it was reported that something may be wrong. The two had been stabbed to death in their home. When police did arrive, they also discovered Monica's 2-year-old son hiding in a closet with a flashlight. He was still alive. Possibly the most disturbing detail of this case is that Monica was pregnant and in her 3rd trimester, set to deliver any day. Due to the trauma of the attack, the baby was delivered, but unfortunately, it did not make it. While police did discover fingerprints, hair, and even fibers at the scene that have all been tested, there were no leads. Even now, nearly 18 years later, there are still no leads. Police have said there were certain things about the scene that would indicate the person committing the crime knew where things were in the house. This, of course, would lead some to believe it was a close friend or relative, but as we said, nothing has come up from the test run on the prints, hair, or fiber. Monica and Dalton's family are continuing to search for answers, and the police are as well. They send out flyers on a regular basis in hopes of jogging someone's memory or even convincing the guilty party to come forward. A Facebook page has also been started to keep the search alive. If you have any information you believe can lead to an arrest in this horrific crime, please contact the proper authorities at 256-462-2291. You can also email them at heflinpolicetip@gmail.com. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to all these cases. We often look to our religious leaders for some kind of guidance. We believe they know something that we don't, or that they can tell us how we should live our lives in order to get where we all want to be. Whether that be the kingdom of heaven or reaching nirvana, we trust these leaders to be trustworthy, honest, and kind human beings. With that said, many are known to wear a mask and hide either their true intentions or their troubling past. Here are 3 religious leaders who were convicted with horrific crimes. Lundgren was born on May 3, 1950. Growing up in Mississippi, his family was heavily religious. His mother and father, and him by extension, were part of the Reorganized Church of Latter-day Saints, RCLDS. As a young child, he was abused mercilessly by his father, and according to those who were his neighbors at the time, his mother did nothing about it. On top of this, Lundgren was an outcast at school and didn't have many friends. Those who knew him at the time referred to him as a loner. This led Jeffrey to spend most of his free time with his father, who taught him how to hunt. By the time he was a teenager, Lundgren knew how to load, fire, and maintain his firearms. In later years, Jeffrey enrolled at Central Missouri State University and stayed at a house that was meant for youths, part of the RCLDS. While staying there, he befriended Alice Keeler and Keith Johnson. Alice and he were both abused as children, so they bonded quickly and soon began sleeping with each other. By 1970, they were married, and Lundgren had enrolled in the Navy. December 2, 1970, their first child was born. 4 years later, he was given an honorable discharge, and not long after, his second son was born. The small family settled in San Diego for some time, but due to financial hardship, they moved back to Missouri in 1979, where they would have a third child. It was around this time that Jeffrey became abusive towards Alice. Reports claim he said he was tired of his wife and his financial troubles. One hospital record shows that Alice was hospitalized over a ruptured spleen that was believed to have come from Jeffrey pushing her into a door handle. In 1980, they had a fourth child, and 7 years later, he was dismissed from the RCLDS. This left Jeffrey with little to no income. It was around this time he began building his own following. The house he was staying in was very close to the Kirtland Temple in Ohio, and he would volunteer there multiple times a week, giving the history of the temple and teaching the concept of chiastic interpretation. The idea is slightly confusing, but here is my best explanation. The belief started in saying everything created by God was a mirror image of itself on one side. He took this belief and applied it to the scripture. If the sentence
these
before
chicks are
and
hot as
after
fuck.
another sentence is consistent or line up with each other with their meaning, then the sentence is true. If they don't line up, the sentence is false. He falsely claimed that this idea was his creation, but built the following nonetheless. In 1987, he was asked to
I would
move out
fuck
of the
them once
house
and let
which the
them kill
church
me.
owned, as they'd become suspicious
The hot
of
ones.
him and believed he'd stolen things from the church on many occasions. Jeffrey did as he was told, and he and his family moved to a small farmhouse east of Ohio State Route 306. Many of his followers at the time stayed in the house with him and his family. These included Kevin Curry, Richard Brand, Greg Winship, Sharon Blunchley, Daniel Kraft, and Debbie Olivares. It was at this time he began taking control of everyone and became the leader of his own homegrown cult. He had very strict rules in place, including one that forbids those staying in the house to speak to one another. He referred to this as the sin of murmuring and would eavesdrop on the members to convince them that he could read their minds. One of the Lundgren's son warned the neighbors that on May 15, 1988, demons would emerge from the ground, leading the police to head out of the residence on April 23, 1988, on suspicion of a cult living in the house. 5 days later, a former member put in a tip to Chief Dennis T. Yarborough about the cult's plan to take over Kirtland Temple. While he didn't believe the claim, he did confront Jeffrey and tell them that there were complaints of gunfire coming from his residence. Later that day, Lundgren called off the takeover. On October 10, 1988, Jeffrey was officially excommunicated from the Church of RLDS. On this same day, a heavy thunderstorm came over the town, and once it had cleared, a rainbow was left behind. Jeffrey told his followers that this represented the opening of the 7 seals. It was around this time Jeffrey began giving Bible study courses in his home, asking for money from his supporters, and claiming that he was the last prophet. Many gave what they could, some even handing over thousands in their life savings. As time ticked on, Jeffrey claimed that the group would go through with the seizing of the temple. He had plans of getting them to vandalize, loot, and deface the temple until he came to a better idea. He began telling his followers that if they wanted to see God when he finally came back, they had to murder a family of 5. Lundgren said the Avery family had been disloyal to the group, and so they would have to be sacrificed. On April 10, 1989, Jeffrey told 2 of his followers to dig a hole fit for 5 bodies in the barn. The rest of his followers, which included the Averys, were told they were going on a trip into the wilderness. A week later, Lundgren rented a motel for all of his followers and ate a meal with them. Not long after this, he called the men of the group into a separate room to question them about their intent in going through with the sacrifice. According to reports, they all told him they were ready to go through with it for him. They decided that this is what needed to be done. That night, Jeffrey and Ron Luff, one of the members of the church, led Dennis Avery into the barn. After failing to stun gun him, he was knocked unconscious and shot twice in the back by Jeffrey. Dennis's wife was brought in next under the guise that her husband needed her help. Once inside the barn, she was bound, gagged, and shot 3 times in the breast and abdomen. Trina, who was only 15 years old, was shot twice in the head, followed by 13-year-old Becky and 6-year-old Karen. All the bodies were left in the hole dug earlier that day. The next day, a few officers came to the house to speak to Jeffrey, and while they didn't speak about the murders, Lundgren became incredibly nervous. Because of this, his family and a small amount of the followers moved to West Virginia. Months passed with no one confronting Jeffrey about the bodies, and so he moved once again. This time, he fled to California and left all the remaining members in West Virginia. 9 months following the killings, on January 3, 1990, a tip from a police informant told them that they needed to look over the farm Jeffrey used to stay at. Once there, they uncovered the bodies, and the search for Jeffrey was on.
There is some confusion over the exact number of bodies that have been found in a common grave in the basement of this barn along Route 6. Police, firemen, and federal alcohol, tobacco, and firearms agents spent the entire day sifting through the grave. The body of a man was found last night, 2 or 3 others this afternoon, and the search goes on at this hour.
With the help of former members, Jeffrey was located and charged with the crimes. Along with him, his wife and 11 other members were arrested in connection with the crime. Jeffrey was given life in prison, and 3 others involved were given anywhere from 50 to 170 years in prison. Only 5 members were given a sentence of about 20 years and were released in late 2010 and early 2011. On October 24, 2006, Jeffrey Lundgren was executed at Southern Ohio Correctional Facility. His last words were, "From my last words, I like to profess my love for God, my family, my children, and my beloved wife. I am because you are." As a quick word of warning, the next installment in this list will include violence against children. Jeffs was born on December 3, 1955 in Sacramento, California, to Rulon Jeffs and Marilyn Steele.
Did you see that ring I want?
His father was a leader of the FLDS Church until he passed away. He left behind over 19 wives and 80 children, given that he practiced polygamy, something that was taken out of the Mormons' tradition back in the 1980s. Despite this, the history of polygamy in Jeff's father's church go back many generations, with Jeff's grandfather having at least 50 wives and allegedly 80 or so children. Before Jeff's father passed away, Warren was just in the position of counselor to the church leader. After Rudolph passed away, Jeffs, who was seen as the golden child after surviving a premature birth, was given the title of President and Prophet, Seer, and Revelator, along with President of the Priesthood. Over the course of 1 week, Jeffs had married nearly all of his father's wives, and those who refused were prohibited from marrying again. Jeffs was the head of the church, and so he had the most power. He used this against individuals who spoke out against him, and he would reassign wives and children to different fathers and homes at will. Since Jeffs had control of the church, its inhabitants, and the land it occupied, he soon built new communities elsewhere, including West Texas. In 2002, he established the Yearning for Zion Ranch and quickly showed off his power. He would control what everyone wore, who they could marry, the toys the children played with, and even refused to give them television or internet. While they were inside, they had no connection to the outside world. In 2004, he excommunicated 21 men on what is being called disobedience. Not long after this, however, the 21 men pulled together and filed a civil suit against him in that same year. A nephew of Jeff's, Brent, also brought a lawsuit against him, claiming that Jeffs had sexually assaulted him. Soon after this, Jeffs dropped from the face of the earth. In 2005, Jeffs was indicted on a charge of sexual conduct with a minor, as well as conspiracy to commit sexual conduct with a minor by authorities in Arizona. A year later, he was also facing 2 counts of rape as an accomplice in 2006 from Utah authorities, when he arranged the marriage between a 14-year-old girl and her cousin, who was 19 years old. During this entire time, Jeffs was nowhere to be found, but as the charges stacked against him, the FBI placed him on their most wanted list. Police and FBI had a gut feeling that he was hiding out in one of the many compounds he'd built for the FLDS, and it was just a matter of finding him. Sometime in August of 2006, Jeffs was captured, hiding out in northern Las Vegas. On his persons, the authority found multiple wigs, sunglasses, and over $50,000 in cash. The next year, Jeffs was taken back to Utah to face charges of being an accessory to rape. While that was overturned, a 2008 raid of the YFZ Ranch in Texas held more than enough evidence to convict him. He went back on trial in 2011 for 2 of his marriages, one with a 12-year-old girl and another with a 15-year-old girl, which in Texas is of course illegal. Among the evidence found in the raid were journals and audio tapes recorded by Jeffs himself. He also had many of his wives write down his daily activities. Amongst the tapes were multiple recordings of assaults committed by Jeffs himself on girls as young as 12 years old.
I think so, it definitely isn't real gold.
In a journal entry he wrote, "If the world knew what I was doing, they would hang me from the highest tree." On top of these 2 damning pieces of evidence, there were records of all of his marriages, which totaled over 70, with over a third being with underage girls. He also acted as his own attorney. Courts say that he would ramble on about nothing, read from the Book of Mormon, and even stood silently in front of the jury for 30 minutes as his closing statement. After all the theatrics he put on during the trial, he was finally sentenced on both accounts of sexual assaults and given life in prison. He continues to act out, however, according to reports. He's been on multiple hunger strikes and attempted suicide, but still resides in Powledge Prison and is currently 62 years old.
Count 2, that the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of the crime charged in count 2 of the information rape as accomplice. Dated this 25th day of September 2007 by the foreperson, Daryl
Finch.
Finch.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffs. You may be seated.
Shoko's birth name was Chizuo Matsumoto, but we will get into why he changed it sometime later in the video. He was born on March 2nd, 1955, in Yatsushiro, Japan, to a family of 7 children. His family weren't very well off and made a living making and selling tatami mats to use as flooring in Japanese homes. Early in life, Shoko developed infantile glaucoma, which left him completely blind in one eye and partially blind in another. He attended a school for the blind and went on to graduate in 1977, but never enrolled in university after that. Instead, he began studying Chinese medicine and married a woman named Tomoko Matsumoto. He sold herbal medicine for 3 years until in 1981 he was convicted of practicing pharmacy without a proper license. Once that fell through, he began studying Taoism and Chinese astrology. 6 years later, Shoko would undergo what he referred to as a spiritual awakening. It was at this time he founded Aum Shinrikyo, which roughly translates to Religion of Truth. The religion is a combination of many other religions, including Hindu and Buddhism, with influences from the Bible's revelations and the writings from Christian monk Nostradamus. The core belief was that the world was soon to come to an end, and Shoko was the only one who would lead those who were worthy to salvation. By the 1990s, Aum Shinrikyo totaled around 10,000 members, and Shoko attempted to put members in office, but they would all lose elections that they were a part of. Not long after this, the group created their own political organizations. Following this, many reports that the group was attempting to create chemical weapons came about. It was in 1995 that the group would become infamous across those in Japan, when 7 members of the Aum Shinrikyo attacked the Tokyo subway with sarin gas. This gas has become commonplace in terrorist-like attacks, given that in its pure form, it's colorless, tasteless, and odorless. When dispersed in a vapor form, it is incredibly dangerous, as it's nearly impossible to tell if you've been affected before it's too late. According to the CDC, extreme symptoms of sarin gas include respiratory failure, convulsions, or seizures, all of which can lead to death. On the attack executed by the Aum Shinrikyo, 13 individuals were killed and over 1,000 were injured severely. After the investigation, Shoko's trial began the next year. It was a lengthy trial that took over 8 years for several reasons. Many of the members began denouncing what took place and distanced themselves from Shoko and his teachings. Shoko also refused to take the insanity defense when offered by his attorney. Finally, a defense attorney was accused of obstruction of justice, but later acquitted. Eventually, though, Shoko was convicted of 13 different crimes in 2004 and sentenced to death. He did appeal in 2006, but was declined. On June 6, 2018, Shoko and a handful of others who played a part in the attack in 1995 were executed by hanging. In 2002, the Aum Shinrikyo organization renamed themselves to Aleph and tried to distance themselves from the attack that took place in 1995. The group still follows and teaches everything Shoko originally did.
Back in 1995, a doomsday cult in Japan carried out a simultaneous attack using sarin gas on Tokyo's subway system, killing 13. Today, the man who founded the group and masterminded the horrific act is executed along with several of his zealots.
This forced Before we begin, I want to explain what this is. Through the year of 2019, I'm planning on trying to cover a handful of cold cases from every state. Of course, I can't cover them all, but I hope to cover at least some of them, bringing them to new eyes. The case of Don Henry and Kevin Ives won't be on here because I've already talked about it in a previous video. If you're interested in seeing that or the other cold cases from previous states, check out the link to the playlist below. Now, here are 5 cold cases from Arkansas. What I've come to terms with some of these cases is that there sometimes isn't a lot to go off of. This case is very much like that. While it happened only 19 years ago as of this writing, it's still perplexing to many. Here's what took place. Amanda was staying at her fiance's house in Jonesboro, Arkansas on the night of June 15th, 2000. Around 11:30 that night, she left for her parents' house, which was in Dell, Arkansas. Unfortunately, she would never make it. 2 hours after she departed, Amanda's fiance and father, who'd left to look for her, reported her abandoned car on Arkansas Highway 18, 5 miles east of St. Francis Bridge. At the time, Amanda was nowhere to be seen. Police investigated the car, the area around it, but found nothing that would help them find the person who abducted her. According to police, Amanda's wallet and keys were in the car. The windshield wipers had stopped halfway, but the radio was still playing her favorite station. While it isn't stated anywhere, many believe this would mean the car was running. 3 days would pass before Amanda's body was found. It was located 12 miles west from where the car was, in a ditch. This is very notable, seeing as she was traveling east. There were heavy rains the night she was abducted, and so any DNA evidence that was left behind would have been washed away. From reports, it said that there was no water in her lungs, meaning she was most likely dead before she was thrown in the ditch. Furthermore, police believe she was strangled to death, but not sexually assaulted. The cold case sat for 7 years, until police reported having a new lead after hearing people talking about the case. Given it's been 12 years since that development, It's safe to say this case is cold once again. While it isn't much to go on, investigators believe Amanda was pulled over by someone impersonating a police officer. Once she was away from her car, they strangled her before throwing her in the ditch. There are a handful of other interesting details, like the drink that was found in her cup holder. It was said that the cup was half or 3/4 of the way full and still cold when the car was found. This would mean if she didn't take it from her fiance's house, she would have had to have stopped somewhere like a gas station or a fast food restaurant. Some theorist online believes someone who worked at these establishments may have known something, or the person who did it could have followed her from there. Aside from the small lead in 2007, there have been no new recent developments. The only thing that raises some questions is another case from Arkansas from 1989. A woman by the name of Dana Stidham was found just shy of 2 months after she went missing in July. While her remains were discovered on the 16th, they weren't reported until the 17th. Nothing came of this in particular, it's just very peculiar. Before she'd been killed, her car was found abandoned on Highway 71 north of Bella Vista Town Center. Just like Amanda's case, there were no signs of a struggle. Her keys were in the ignition and her wallet was left untouched. The only difference here is that Dana's tire was flat and the contents of her purse were thrown about the area of Chaser and Hanover Road. Dana's case is still unsolved as well, but there was a suspect, a man named Michael McMillan. While he was never formally charged, only investigated, he did give a strange testimony. Firstly, Dana's hair was found in his truck. This made sense as the two were dating at the time, but other actions Michael took were very strange. At one point, he stole the temporary grave marker on Dana's grave. He was charged with a misdemeanor theft and let off. His lawyer said he did it so he could have something to remember her by. The statement he gave during the initial investigation, however, is what caught many people's attention. He'd been formally investigated for 7 years at this point when he gave a statement saying, "Sometimes I think I killed Dana, but I know I didn't."
New information tonight in a 24-year-old cold case. The Benton County Sheriff's Office has reopened the investigation into Dana Stidham's murder. The sheriff says they're now using new technology and taking a second look at some people who may be involved in the case. In an exclusive interview, the sheriff said one of those people is this man, Orville Goodwin. He's accused of shooting a woman in the face back in May and leaving her to die in a Bella Vista Creek bed.
The similarities in these cases are quite chilling, and if Michael didn't do it, it's possible that Arkansas has a potential serial killer on their hands. The entire thing is incredibly chilling, and I implore you to theorize in the comments. If you have any information you believe can lead to answers in either case, contact the Arkansas Police at info@asp.arkansas.gov. For Amanda's case, call the Jonesboro Police at 870-935-5553. For Dana's case, call the Bentonville Police at 479-271-3170. Morgan Nick was only 6 years old when she was abducted. It was the night of June 9th, 1995, and Morgan and her mother Colleen was at a Little League baseball game in Alma, Arkansas, when a group of young girls asked if Morgan could come catch fireflies with them. Her mother was hesitant at first, but eventually relented, and Morgan left with the girls around 10:30 p.m. It was only 15 minutes later that the girls returned. Except Morgan. When the mother asked where she was, the girls said she was emptying sand from her shoes by Colleen's car. Colleen made it over there, but Morgan was nowhere to be seen. More and more people left the game, and soon only a handful of people were left. Still, Morgan was missing. Colleen spoke to a coach who spoke to a couple of kids about the abduction. While they couldn't give a name, they all described a man who looked creepy. He was said to be driving a red pickup truck while talking to Morgan. When that truck left, she was gone. The search began immediately, but unfortunately, nothing came up that could help. Even a year following her abduction, there were no new leads, but Colleen made the best out of a terrible situation and founded the Morgan Nick Foundation, which aids in searches for missing children, as well as helping those who are going through what she is cope with it. There has only ever been one suspect, the man you see in the composite sketch now. As far as new developments, in 2012, Tanya Smith and James Monhart attempted to use Morgan's identity in connection with computer fraud, but they're not believed to be connected to the case. In 2017, a man who has been a person of interest had his yard searched, but nothing was found. He's serving time right now for unrelated charges. If you have any information on Morgan's case, please call the Alma, Arkansas Police at 479-632-3333. Melissa's case has very little to go off of. It takes place in Fort Smith, Arkansas on the 1st of December, 1994. She was abducted while heading into Bowling World with the intention of surprising her mother. Her body wasn't found until the following year in January by two hunters heading through Ozark National Forest near Turner Bend. Melissa was completely nude. Her clothes have never been found. Now, some 25 years later, police have nearly nothing to go off of. Aside from her body and small amounts of blood found at the scene, there is no more real evidence. Despite this, police are investigating it regularly and have said they're taking tips and conducting interviews whenever they believe something has come up. If you have any bit of information on Melissa's case, please do not wait to submit a tip to the police. You can call the Fort Smith Police at 479-785-4221. On the morning of January 28, 2008, John was seen leaving his home in Little Rock, Arkansas, a short time after 5 a.m. It wouldn't be until 2:30 that afternoon that his wife was told he hadn't shown up for work. An investigation was put underway when a cell phone tower placed John in the area of Petite Jean Mountain. It would be the following day that John's car, a 2005 Volvo SUV, was found parked in the parking lots of Mather Lodge at Petite Jean State Park. Inside the SUV, which was locked, was John's cell phone, laptop, and many other belongings. A more extensive search was put underway that day, and over the 5 days, nothing came up. It was officially called off on the 2nd of February. John's family were devastated and still searching for answers, and so on February 8th, they held a press conference saying that they would reward $5,000 if anyone were to find John. Eventually, in May of 2009, the reward reached a peak at a staggering $100,000. There aren't many things leading to suspects in this case. CDI Construction, the company John was the CEO of, the parent company, was under audit at the time of his disappearance, but it was later determined that there was nothing illegal going on. Furthermore, John was paid a very large bonus before he disappeared. Some believe this could have been used to blackmail or ransom, but the money has not been touched. A press conference held in 2016 by John's brother gave the public more updates surrounding the case, including that John's remains had been found and identified. There were reportedly no signs of blunt force trauma to the head and no signs of gunshot wounds. Furthermore, John's family said he wasn't a frequent visitor to Petite Jean Mountain, and the trail he was found on was one for very experienced hikers. As of now, John's case remains cold, and there have been no new leads in years. With that said, there's always hope. If you have any information that you believe can help investigators, please call the Little Rock Police at 501-371-4605. Lucas was last seen on the 29th of November in 2003. He was spotted at his apartment in Wine, Arkansas, located off Highway 1 North. During the initial search of his home, police found the apartment was unlocked and everything he had of value, as well as much more important things, were left behind. Inside the apartments were his phone, his wallet with money inside, and clothes. Also found was his medication. The name of the medication isn't listed, but Lucas suffered from depression and bipolar disorder, as well as being autistic. Being alone without proper medication has placed him in the endangered missing category. Lucas had no car, and from what I've read, didn't know how to drive. His grandparents, who raised and took care of Lucas, described him as a loner and stated he had a long history of emotional problems. A week before Lucas went missing, his grandmother stated that he was in the hospital, but it isn't reported what he was in there for. His grandmother said in an online post, "Luke has an extensive history of emotional problems. He may be in a hospital. He may be homeless, talking to trees or lampposts. He may have found a girl and hooked up his life with hers." That is the most recent update I can find, which is dated January 27th, 2017. It's also said that he had no close friends, leaving no one to investigate further if foul play was believed to be involved. Luke is described as a white male with brown eyes and brown hair cut very short. He's 5'9" and around 175 pounds. There's a large birthmark on his leg. If you have any information you believe can lead to a break in this case, please call the Wine, Arkansas Police at 870-238-5700. I want to take a second to thank you all for listening to these stories. As I said, if you have any information you believe can lead to an arrest in any of these cases, please do not hesitate to submit your tips to all the numbers I listed in the video. There are also links to all the sources I use in the description if you would like to read up a little bit more on a certain case. Thank you again for listening, and of course, stay safe out there. To begin, I want to introduce what we're doing here for anyone who is new. Over the year of 2019, I'll be attempting to cover cold cases from every state. This is the third video in the series, and if you'd like to watch the rest, the playlist is listed below. I'm writing this video in late February, so I apologize if I've missed any recent developments. Today, we have 5 cold cases from Arizona. We begin with Justin Lee Richardson, who went missing in 2001 in Grand Canyon, Arizona. He was only 13 years old, around 4'10" and 100 pounds. It begins in Kaibab National Forest on June 29th when Justin and 3 of his friends were walking in an area a few miles south of Grand Canyon National Park and around 5 miles west of Moquay Lodge. Moquay Lodge has since been torn down. His 3 friends were in the age range of 18 to 21, and it's believed they could have been under the influence of drugs, with the most extreme being methamphetamine. While hiking through the forest, the group became lost, and soon Justin and another boy were alone. Eventually, the man with Justin hiked out of the forest alone with hopes of finding the other 2 men before giving up and heading back into the forest. He had not been able to locate the other two men, but they eventually made it back by following train tracks towards Williams. They'd already been found by railroad employees around 15 miles from their original location. Justin and the other man were not aware of this. According to him, he made his way back into the forest, and around 9 a.m., he was coming down from the methamphetamines. He fell asleep on the forest floor and woke up several hours later with no idea where Justin had gone. The man made it to a dirt road and hitched back to Tussian. When he made it back, he didn't report Justin missing. Justin wouldn't be reported missing until July 2nd, 3 days after his initial disappearance. His parents were separated, his mother in Flagstaff and his father living in Tussian, where Justin was staying. According to reports, he was allowed to come and go as he pleased. As the investigation was put underway, many theories began arising. Seeing how lenient Justin's father was, it wasn't unlikely that Justin had plans of running away. He'd done it once before. Along with this, he had a girlfriend who lived in Chicago that he'd planned on going to see at some point. Despite these theories, police believed that Justin was a victim of homicide. According to them, Justin would have known the area well, as he'd spent a majority of his time there. There were multiple landmarks throughout the forest, well-traveled dirt roads, and as we mentioned before, railroad tracks that Justin most likely knew the location of. In the end, over 64 miles of woods were searched on foot, horseback, and a helicopter, only to lead to no leads. The 3 men involved were interviewed, but at the time, they weren't considered suspects. Now, one of them has passed away, and we're left with nothing. If you have any information about the disappearance of Justin Richardson, please contact the Coconino County Cold Case Division at 928-774-4523. Next is Pauline Burgett. Pauline was only 16 years old when in March of 1978, she was stabbed to death while her mother and brother were away on a weekend trip. Her brother, Chad, who was only 11 years old at the time, discovered her. The police were called soon after. It was later determined that she'd been sexually assaulted before being stabbed to death. At the scene, police found very little evidence, and soon the case grew cold. The only lead they have is the small amount of DNA discovered that helped them to later determine that there were at least 2 individuals at the scene when the murder took place. Now, some 41 years later, that's all they know.
No matter how much time passes, the family of Pauline Burgett will never forget coming home to find her brutally murdered. Reporter Julia Thatcher spoke with her brother and Phoenix Police Department today to learn how they are working to solve the cold case decades later.
With such little evidence, the only thing police can do were theorize. There are 3 main theories getting tossed around, including it being a random killing, a boyfriend, or a friend or acquaintance. Firstly is the idea of it being totally random. While it would be easier to swallow knowing it wasn't someone she knew, it's highly unlikely. First, there were no signs of forced entry, meaning whoever it was, they knew Pauline and she knew them well enough to allow them into her home while she was alone. Along with this, many detectives who worked on this case took note of the brutality of it. One detective stated, "Whoever committed the crime, this was a crime of anger and rage, and Robin knew her perpetrator." Secondly, we have the theory of it being her boyfriend. Of course, she did have a boyfriend at the time, but police are unsure if the two ever met up that night. From the timeline that was crafted from interviews, we know that earlier that day, Pauline had spent the day with a close friend. Pauline told her that she had plans to meet up with him later that night, so it's possible, and I believe likely, that they got into some kind of altercation. It could have been that he was ready for sex, and she wasn't. As of now, his name hasn't been released. Finally, there's the idea of it being a close friend or acquaintance. Pauline had been babysitting at a housing complex for an extended period of time leading to her death. It's believed by some that a man from this housing complex came to visit her, gave her a ride home, or something similar, and possibly talked himself into the house. It was stated that one man was reported for making sexual advances on several women there, including Pauline. But again, his name has never been released. As of this writing, late February, there have been no new updates on Pauline's case since 2016. It's been over 40 years, but that doesn't mean the search for justice is any less important. If you have any information that you believe can lead to an arrest, please contact the Arizona Police Department at 602-262-6151. Next is the case of Kayleen Marine Gallegos. Kayleen has been missing since mid-2010. She was staying at her father's house in Lakeside in May when she got into a car with two men. The three were heading out to purchase heroin. While one of the men's names have not been released, the other one is named Jacob Matta. He was a suspect at one point in the investigation, which is why his name was released. After the group made it to Phoenix and purchased the drugs, the unnamed man left and a woman got into the car with Kayleen and Jacob. From there, they began driving down State Route 87, headed to Show Low, but ended up getting lost. Before they knew it, they were on a Forest Service road in the White Mountain Apache Forest. At 8 p.m. on the 22nd of May, they came to an opening and debated on what to do next. They eventually agreed that Jacob and Kayleen would stay behind while the unnamed woman took the car. Jacob and Kayleen built a fire and stayed overnight. The following morning, according to Jacob, the two began walking. There was around 15 to 30 feet between the two of them. They soon came to a small canyon where both attempted to climb out. Jacob made it to the top and he saw a road, but Kalina was nowhere to be seen. This was just after 1 p.m. Jacob says he called out and searched for Kayleen for around 40 minutes, but after getting no response, he continued on without her. He made it to the road and stopped 3 cars, asking for food, water, and directions. He told the person in the 3rd car about Kalina, saying she was lost in the forest, but soon began running when he saw police. He had multiple warrants on him, as well as drugs in his possession. He was eventually arrested, and a week later was asked to show the police the last place he'd seen Kalina, but he claimed he couldn't remember. His story was corroborated by the unnamed female that was with them at the time. It's believed that foul play was involved in this case. If you have any information you believe can lead to an arrest in this case, or the police finding the body of Kalina, please contact them at 928-824-4050. Next up is the case as Mikkel Biggs, or the girl who vanished in 90 seconds. It begins on January 2nd, 1999, 20
Have you
years
ever heard
ago.
of Arizona or Peace Tea?
Mikkel and her sister Kimber thought they'd heard an ice cream truck right down
It's
the
a
street,
tea-flavored
so they got
drink.
money from their mom and
They're
began
really
riding
good.
their bikes toward the sound. There, at the intersection of Toldick Street and El Moro Avenue, only 4
You probably
houses
have
down
them,
from
but as
their
a different
house.
brand.
After a small time, Kimber got cold and decided to head back.
It's more an
Mikkel
us
stayed
Canada
at the
thing, I think,
intersection.
those two brands.
When Kimber made it back home, her mom sent her back to get Mikkel. She wasn't there. On the street was Mikkel's bike, turned over with the front wheel still spinning. It was clear from the beginning that this was an abduction. The police jumped on the case and put together one of the most extensive searches in Arizona's history. They searched every home aside from one.
https://www.pc.com/products.
Speaking of suspects, numerous
Look
sex
at that, they
offenders
got
were
good
interviewed
stuff.
and roadblocks were set up in and around the neighborhood. Fields that were close by and mine shafts were also searched, but there was no sign of Mikkel. Police strongly believe that it had to have been someone living in the neighborhood, but as we said, none have been seriously considered as a suspect except for one. A man by the name of D. Blaylock is the prime suspect. He's a registered sex offender in 3 separate states, and his house was only 2 blocks from Mikkel's. With that said, his wife gave him a solid alibi. 2 years after Mikkel's disappearance, his name was brought up a second time because of his attack on a neighbor. He had broken into her house, raped her, and beat her nearly to death. He was given 187 years in prison. Police have asked him multiple times if he killed Mikkel, but he continues to deny it. The only event that would seem to be a lead came last year in March. Mikkel's sister came across a dollar bill with the sentence, "My name is Mikkel Biggs, kidnapped from Mesa, Arizona. I'm alive." In an interview with Inside Edition, Kimber said she was unsure how to take it. She noticed that Mikkel's name was spelled wrong and that it could be a cruel joke. Despite that, it did bring Mikkel's case back into the attention of those who may have forgotten. If you have any information that you believe can help investigators locate Mikkel and bring closure to this family, please call the correct authorities at 480-644-2071. Finally, we have the case of Valentine Sally. As far as I can remember, this is the first cold case I've covered with facial reconstruction, but no name. Valentine Sally is a name given to an unidentified woman near WB Interstate 40. The man who discovered her was an Arizona Department of Public Safety officer who was originally looking for a tire that had recently blown out from a vehicle on the road. Valentine Sally was face down around 25 feet from the interstate. It's believed she was dragged there by the belt loop of her pants. This particular stretch of interstate was on an incline, and it was common for large trucks to pull over and cool their brakes. If it was a truck driver who dragged her out of there, the truck being parked would not have been suspicious. It's estimated that Valentine Sally had been out there for 10 to 14 days, but decomposition, along with her being partially eaten by animals, could have left investigators with an incorrect estimation. Her fingerprints were impossible to retrieve, but DNA and dental charts were taken. As of now, there are no new leads. No one has come forward saying they are related to Valentine Sally or saying that they know who she may be. It's been over 35 years, and aside from one misidentification and one possible sighting 10 days before she was found, there's nothing more to go on. If you recognize this woman, believe you know her, or who could have done this, please contact the Williams, Arizona Police Department at 928-635-4461. I want to thank you all again for coming by and giving these stories a As time ticks on, I feel as if there are fewer and fewer people that we can trust. Even those who take on the duty of protecting us may have evil intentions from the start. When given a badge and a gun, it can put someone in a position they've longed for, a position of power. How they use it can greatly affect their lives and those around them. Some use it for good, others, not so much. Here are 3 police officers turned killers. Manuel wanting a career in the force was evident from a very early age. He was born in New York, and at that young age started attending the Boy Scouts. At a later age, he joined the Navy, but wouldn't start his career in the force until the 1970s. He began in Florida Highway Patrol, reportedly graduating at the top of his class at the time. By 1979, however, he was let go after being caught falsifying traffic tickets. Not long after this, though, he found work at the police department for a small town known as Sweetwater, located in Miami-Dade County. In 1981, the crimes he would eventually commit were, in a way, harrowingly foreshadowed. Along with 3 other officers on the Sweetwater PD, Manuel were charged with brutality, which could have carried a fair amount of time for the group in prison, but all the charges were dismissed. 4 years later, he was fired from the force when he flew to the Bahamas to testify in a trial with one of his colleagues. His fellow officer was being held on drug smuggling charges, but Manuel told the court that the men they were involved with were just undercover agents. That following year, Manuel's crime spree began. Over the course of 92 days, Manuel and an accomplice named Rolando Garcia killed 6 men and 3 women while attempting to rob them. In various publications, it's written that Manuel took photos of the bodies and wrote about them in his diary. Along with these photos were newspaper clippings talking about the crimes. Manuel wouldn't be linked to the crimes until he was caught using credit cards of some of the victims. His DNA was also found at the last scene because he accidentally shot himself in the foot. After he'd done so, Manuel and Rolanda flew to New York, where they visited a hospital saying he was shot in the foot while visiting. The police matched the bullet to the one found at the scene and obtained a search warrant for his home. It was there they discovered the diary we spoke of before. On top of this, there was a calendar found in the house with dates circled corresponding to the murders. As is often with cases like these, Manuel's defense claimed he was insane and were looking for a shorter, less damning sentence for him, but Manuel testified against this. According to him, everyone he killed was a drug dealer or in some way connected to the drug trade. Everyone in the courtroom listened as he stated his reasons for the killing and how he was very much sane while doing so. In his trial, he stated, "I am a soldier. I accomplished my mission and I humbly asked for you to give me the glory of ending my life and not send me to spend the rest of my days in a state prison." Manuel was held in prison for 24 years before being given his wish and was executed on December 11, 2012. Stephanie met a man named John Rutan while studying at UCLA. The two were studying there from 1978 to 1982 and developed an intimate relationship. While the two were never officially dating, it's reported that they were very sexually active. The two met up for sex often, and Stephanie would steal John's clothes while he showered. Furthermore, she took photos of him while he slept, often in the nude. It's safe to say she believed there was more to this relationship than there actually was. After they graduated in 1983, Stephanie joined the police force and John became a hard drive manufacturer. Their sexual relationship eventually petered out as John began seeing more women with serious relationships in mind. One of these women were Sherry Rasmussen. During a surprise party thrown by Stephanie for John, she learned of his and Sherry's relationship and how serious it was becoming. The two had sex one last time to gain what she referred to as closure. In a journal, she wrote, "I wish it didn't end the way it did, and I don't think I'll ever understand his decision. I really don't feel like working. I found out that John is getting married." It was during this time Stephanie visited John and Sherry at their apartment to drop off her skis. She asked John to wax them for her, but this made Sherry very uncomfortable. According to reports, Stephanie was dressed in workout clothes that were rather revealing, and after she left, Sherry made John assure her that the two were just friends. He did, and told her to just ignore Stephanie. It was the morning of February 24th, 1986, however, that Stephanie could no longer be ignored. Over the course of the day, strange things began adding up. At 9:45 that morning, a neighbor noticed Sherry's garage was open, but there was no car inside. At 10, just 15 minutes later, John made the first call home that went unanswered. By noon, two men who were gardeners for the neighborhood handed over a purse to John that turned out to be Sherry's. Finally, a maid from a nearby unit said she'd heard two people fighting around 12:30 before there was the sound of something large falling to the ground. That evening, when John made it home, he found the garage door wide open and empty. There was also glass seen at the front door. Once he was inside, he discovered Sherry, who had been badly beaten and shot 3 times. The scene was a mess. There was evidence of an intense struggle with bruising around Sherry's wrist, indicating someone attempted to bound her. A bloody handprint was found near the alarm system, and a vase had been broken over Sherry's head. The 3 shots that had been fired had been muffled by a quilt. The initial investigation pointed to a robbery gone horribly wrong. Police believed the one who was responsible for the burglary was in the process of stealing electronics and was caught by Sherry. This would be when the fight broke out and she was shot and killed. This also explained why no jewelry was taken from the scene, and the car, which was found a week later, was used as a convenient means of escape. Strangely enough, the only thing missing from the home was the couple's marriage license. John was quickly ruled out as a suspect and moved from LA soon after. While Stephanie was considered as a suspect in the case, she was quickly put to the side as a burglary took place a few days later. In this case, the robbers were said to have been carrying guns, and so the focus was placed on the idea of robbery once again. Sherry's case would go unsolved for 23 years. Over those 23 years, Stephanie continued working for the police force and even started her own private investigation firm. She even received a medal at the World Police and Fire Games in San Diego. All the while, Stephanie's family were not given justice. In 2009, however, the case was reopened after the crime in the area slowed down enough for new investigators to look into it. Almost immediately, they threw out the burglary idea and began looking into female suspects, like Stephanie. It came down to the bite mark left on Sherry. The DNA that was taken at the time was tested once again, and it was a match to Stephanie's. In a very careful and calculated interview process, they eventually told Stephanie that her DNA had been found on Sherry's body. She was promptly arrested. She was placed in prison with $10 million bail, but once the trial was over, she was given 27 years to life in 2012. An attempt at having the case appealed was denied in 2015. Antoinette was born on April 30th, 1971, and while little is known about her home life, it's said that it was most likely not a very stable one. It's also believed she wanted to be a police officer at a very young age. In 1993, she applied to join the New Orleans Police Department. Despite numerous instances of her being caught lying on her application and also failing 2 psychiatric evaluations, she was placed into the department. The NOPD was suffering from a large crime wave and were extremely short-staffed. They also believed that having an African-American woman on the force would help relieve the racial tensions that were present in the town. She was hired and graduated at the academy the same month. The following year, Anne was involved with a drug dealer being shot. A man by the name of Roger Lacaze was the prime suspect. Interestingly enough, this wasn't the first time Anne met with Rogers. According to reports, they'd known each other around 8 months prior to the incident at Kim On, which we'll get into soon. The two's relationship became noticeable as time passed, and Anne became more lenient on what Rogers could do. In various cases, Rogers was said to have been seen in Anne's car while she was taking care of an incident. When probed about it, she gave various excuses saying he was a trainee or her nephew. Some individuals even claim that the two would pull over drivers and rob them at gunpoint, using Ann's badge and uniform as leverage. Ann was asked about her relationship with Rogers on various occasions, but would always say that she was attempting to help him stay off the streets. When his past of drugs and violence were brought up, she dismissed it. On March 4th, 1995, however, it all came to a head. Ann and Rogers showed up to a restaurant Ann frequented, called Kim On. She'd had overnight security shifts there before and knew the owners very well enough for them to give her free meals even when she wasn't working. When Ann and Rogers showed up, another officer there was working security, Ronald Williams. She introduced Rogers as her nephew, but Ronald knew who he actually was and knew that there was no relation. As such, he informed the owners that Rogers and Ann were bad news. Later that night around midnight, when Ann and Rogers had left, Chow began closing down the store. She headed to the back to begin counting money, and it was around this time she noticed one of the keys to the store was missing. Once she was finished counting, she paid Williams for staying overnight, but was shocked to see Ann back at the door, shaking it to get in. She felt like something was off and hid the money in the kitchen. Kwok, Chow's brother, was talking with Williams when Ann made her way in through the back door using the stolen key. Williams attempted to confront her about it, but she pushed through him and headed to the kitchen. It was at this time Rogers shot Williams in the back of the head, paralyzing him. Rogers then shot him twice more, killing him. When Ann was distracted, Chow grabbed Kwok and the second employee before heading into the freezer and turning the lights off to hide. Chow and Kwok separately looked through the small window and said they saw Ann taking the money before forcing Chow's brother and sister to get on their knees. The two were both shot and killed. Soon after, Ann and Rogers fled the scene. Kwok quickly called the police. Ann made it back to the scene just seconds before more officers could make it and was quick to put up a bogus story. She claimed that 3 men with ski masks had run out the back just moments before she pulled in. As time ticked on and Chow regained her composure, she quickly pointed to Ann, saying she knew exactly what happened because she was there. Ann and Rogers were taken in for questioning and ended up pointing the finger at each other. Ann eventually took the blame for killing Ha and Kwong, saying Rogers had a gun to her head. Rogers confessed to killing Ronald Williams soon after. They were both given the death penalty for first-degree murder. I just want to say thank you to everyone who watched the video. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to leave a like and comment down below with some of your ideas for future videos. If you know of anyone who would enjoy this type of true crime content, be sure to share the videos around. I really When someone goes missing, we remain hopeful that they will be found. More often than not, they are, and the situation is stuffed out before it becomes a larger issue. What happens when you're not dealing with just one person, though? but an entire family. December 7th, 1958. The Martin family were on their way to purchase some Christmas decorations. Their family consisted of Kenneth and Barbara Martin and their 3 daughters, Barbara, or Barbie, Susan, and Virginia. The girls were 14, 13, and 11. The family also had a son, but he was stationed with the U.S. Navy at the time of their disappearance. They drove down into the Columbia River Gorge, hoping to find somewhere to purchase Christmas decorations, but their exact intended location is still unknown. From eyewitness reports from individuals who interacted with or saw the family, police were able to build a loose timeline. Dean Baxter, a man who owns a gas station in Cascade Locks, said they purchased gas around 4 p.m. that day. At this point, they would have been 40 miles from their home in Portland. Dean Baxter then told police that he'd seen them driving eastward. Not long after that interaction, the family was seen again in a restaurant located in Hood River, about 20 miles from the gas station. Finally, the family was seen by a handful of passing motorists, saying that the family was standing on the bank of the Columbia River right around the time the sun was going down. Kenneth was last seen wearing a tan zip-up jacket and dark slacks. His wife Barbara was wearing a navy blue coat, a plaid jacket, and a black print dress. Finally, Barbie was said to have had on jeans with a rolled cuff and a beige jacket. 2 days later, on December 9th, Kenneth never showed up for work, and so they were reported missing. The investigation began at the Martins' family home. While police initially believed there was going to be some kind of foul play involved, they found that the house had nothing of note. There were clothes left in the washer and dishes on the drying rack. Furthermore, both of the Martins' bank accounts had been untouched and held a large amount of money. Searches for the family were put underway in Multnomah and Hood River County, but both proved to be inconclusive. The only thing of note was a stolen white Chevrolet, which was found in Cascade Locks, but as it wasn't the same make and model of Kenneth's car, it was dismissed as evidence. On December 28, 1958, a woman's glove was discovered that many hoped would take police to some kind of lead, but it couldn't be identified as belonging to Barbara Martin. There was also a .38 Colt Commander handgun found near the site that had been stolen from a department store. 2 ex-convicts were charged with the theft and car theft on the 8th of December, and while this raised the idea of the 2 being involved in the disappearance, there was no way to connect them. Sometime later, on May 1st, 1959, a river drilling rig hooked something onto their anchor. Before they could pull it up, however, it detached. 2 days later, the body of Susan was discovered on the north bank of the Columbia River near Camas, Washington. Sometime later, on May 1st, 1959, a river drilling rig hooked something onto their anchor. Before they could pull it up, however, it detached. 2 days later, the body of Susan was discovered on the north bank of the Columbia River near Camas, Washington. The next day, Virginia's body was found near Bonneville Dam. The bodies of both the girls were taken to Multnomah County and Portland for autopsies. A technician who took fingerprints from the girls said he believed to have seen a bullet wound in either of their heads. However, the medical examiner said no wound like that was found. The official cause of death was drowning. The sheriff of Hood River County at the time believed that the drilling rig had overturned the Martins' car, and thus the two bodies were able to slip out and be recovered. There were many more searches of the river by sonar and helicopter, but nothing was found. The search was finally suspended when a driver nearly drowned looking for evidence of the bodies of Kenneth, Barbara, and Barbie. There isn't much in the way of theories for this case, but there is a handful. Some believe Kenneth simply lost control of the car and swerved off a cliff into the water. Others believe they were run off the road or abducted and forced off the cliff. Police continue to suspect foul play in the disappearance and say that the tire tracks are their reason for the belief. Another thing that has police and internet investigators scratching their heads are the reported sightings of the family on the north bank of a river in Washington state. The tire tracks were found on the south side of the river in Oregon. The bodies of Kenneth, Barbara, and Barbie have never been found. If you have any information you feel could help lead to the discovery of Kenneth, Barbara, or Barbie, please contact the Oregon Police Department at 608-835-3111. That's 608-835-3111. Leslie Guthrie picked up her two children, Julie, age 6, and Timothy, age 3, from her ex-husband's home on February 5, 1977. While the two were divorced, their relationship as friends was strong, and many friends and family said there was no bad blood between them. She left with the kids for a day trip in her green 1947 Ford Maverick. Leslie, Julie, and Timothy and the Ford Maverick were never seen again. From the jump, police began working hard to find the missing three and went through every possible theory, but each one seemed to fall apart at some point. In cases like these, the ex-spouse would be suspect number one, and Tim was for a short while, but given his willingness to cooperate with police and the fact that he hired a private investigator himself, it seemed as if he wanted them home just as much as the police did. With the ex-husband no longer a suspect, the police thought Leslie may have taken the children to start a new life somewhere else. However, she left quite a bit of what she owned behind. It would seem she had no intention of leaving for more than a few hours. Her clothes and valuables were left behind, and her bank account didn't show any suspicious activity. The case fell into the void after no new leads were coming about, but internet sleuths haven't forgotten about this one. There are three other theories that are very popular among those on the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit that I want to touch on. The first and possibly the most heartbreaking is murder-suicide. A user by the name of A Wondering Girl stated in their post about the theory, "As much as I hate to speculate this manner of resolution, it is possible that Leslie disappeared with the intention of ending her own life and or her children's lives. Unfortunately, this seems all too common." And sadly, they're right. There have been multiple cases, some we've spoken of here on this channel, that play out the way this theory does. The second theory is also heartbreaking, but more plausible in my opinion. The user writes, "I'm not sure what Catanoa, New York is like. Perhaps they, unintentionally or otherwise, ran into some water and the car has simply not been recovered." Finally, there's the theory of foul play. Possibly a carjacking went horribly wrong and the bodies along with the car were disposed of. A small while later in 1978, police believed to have had a lead when a tabloid magazine published an article on a man living near the Nevada-Utah border who had several wives, one of which resembled Leslie and even had her name listed as such. Police contacted the man talked about in the article, but he was not there. Much later in 1984, the police in Wyoming put out an alert for women who had changed her appearance, had 2 children, and was believed to be hiding from someone. While she was found, Tim said the children were not his. That's where the case stayed for some time before 1993, when Leslie's mother began getting multiple calls from someone talking about the case. After further investigation, though, it turned out to be a relative with mental and emotional issues, and so the case was left at another dead end. The final lead police received came in 2006 when a relative of Leslie's gave them a suitcase that belonged to her. Inside, there were toothbrushes that police believed to have been used by Leslie and the children. While DNA was extracted from them and put into the system, to this day, there have been no matches. Leslie was announced officially dead in 1994, but her 2 children are believed to be alive, depending on which theory you subscribe to. Anyone with information is asked to call the Bedford Police Detectives at 914-241-3111. 914-241-3111. Police say all calls would be kept confidential. Julie would be 43 years old at this time, and Tim would be 40 years old. Let's just hope they come back home soon. Barbara Burnhands has not been seen since March 15th of 1982. Her parents, Carmen Garcia and Diego Garcia, have also never been found. It begins on that same March morning when Carmen's mother came down to visit the family for breakfast. Carmen was reportedly crying, but no one, including her mother, asked why. A few hours later at noon, Barbara and her parents set out on the road in their 1977 Toyota Corolla. They didn't pack their car with anything to indicate they planned on leaving. No clothes, no food, and they even left the family dog behind. Carmen's mother never saw them again. It was on April 25th of the same year when the family's car was found. It was located in the San Gabriel Mountains off Route 2 near Big Pines, California. The car had seemed to run off the road, and it was trapped in a gorge off of a 500-foot snowbank. The car was buried under 5 feet of snow, causing the roof to collapse inward. Luckily, and possibly not so luckily, there was no blood discovered in the car once it was recovered, and there were also no signs of foul play. Strangely, the road had been closed to the public the day before the family went missing, which led police to believe they were either forced off the road, pushed down the embankment to hide it, or their car was hit by a snowplow. With so little to go on, police had to grasp at whatever they could. They believed that Carmen had secretly converted to Mormonism and that she was involved in some type of cult-like activity. Reports of this supposed cult using candles and live animal sacrifices were brought up during the time of her disappearance. However, there was no way of proving this. Other theories follow the idea that Diego was beginning to fall into bad habits like drinking and drugs. Carmen, not wanting her daughter to see that, took Barbara and fled to a small neighborhood community in Miami, Florida, known as Little Havana. Again, however, this could not be proven, and there were no leads that could help investigators. Over the years, there have been a handful of reported sightings of Carmen, but Diego and Barbara have not been seen since the disappearance. If you have any information that you believe could aid in the investigation, please call the Los Angeles Police Department at 1-213-996-1800. 1-213-996-1800. If you have any information on the cases we covered today, you can call the National Center for the Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-843-5678. Before we begin, I just want to apologize for the brevity in some of these entries. Unfortunately, there just isn't much information on any of them. But don't let that take away from the fact that these cases can be solved. Always remember that. For those who are new here, I want to let you know that we're slowly working through all 50 states and covering various cold cases from each. This is the second installment, and if you'd like to see the first video, I'll link the playlist below. Without further ado, here are 5 cold cases from Alaska. Douglas Foster, who also went by Doug, was last seen the night of November 9th, 2002 in Anchorage, Alaska. It was on this night that he was celebrating his 21st birthday with a group of friends before being dropped off somewhere near 12th and C Street. That was the last time he's ever been seen. He was wearing a brown suede jacket and tan hat, 5'10" to 6 feet tall and around 155 pounds. He had black hair with red highlights at the time of his disappearance and brown eyes. And unfortunately, that's all I can find about this case. Aside from the page on the Anchorage missing site, an online forum, and the Charlie Project page, there is nothing else. No news articles or videos I can find. With that said, we can still theorize here. I found the intersection of C Street and West 12th Avenue. It isn't stated if he lived in one of the houses on these streets, but if he was dropped off there, it's safe to assume. Buildings on this street include an elementary school, a church, and even a bed and breakfast. If he wasn't near his home, he could have sought refuge in either the church or the B&B. Obviously, he didn't, or someone would have come forward saying he did so. If he was intoxicated, which is also unknown, he could have attempted to walk it off before heading home. Depending on where C Street he was dropped off, he's only a 30-minute to 1-hour long walk from a bridge on Minnesota Drive. There's a bank leading to Westchester Lagoon in which he could have tripped and fallen in, leading him to drown. As I stated, this is only a theory, and given this took place in 2002, someone would have seen his body in the water by now. Unless it was weighed down. Someone could have taken his life in a robbery gone wrong and, in a panic, thrown him into the lagoon. I'm not an expert, but I feel as if this is at least plausible. If you have any tips that you believe can help investigators find Douglas, please contact the Anchorage Police at 907-786-8500. It was the afternoon of June 30th, 1992, that the body of Teresa Sterling was discovered by 2 tourists visiting Earthquake Park. She was nearly nude, only wearing white socks that were caked in mud. Initial investigation showed numerous bruises all over her body, and it's believed whatever was used to beat her was also the murder weapon. There have been no reports further than this on Teresa's case. All we know about her is that she was last seen on the Spainard area of Anchorage, which is only an 8-minute drive away from where she was located. She was seen here around 8 p.m. on the 29th of June, just a day before she was discovered. Spainard, from what I can gather, is a small neighborhood in Anchorage, so it's likely if this was the last place she was seen, she either lived there or knew someone who did. Perhaps a boyfriend or other close friend. It's possible the two got into a heated argument about something, leading whoever took her life to do so. There's also the idea of her being sexually assaulted beforehand. As I said, there are no reports of this, but given that she was completely naked, aside from socks, I feel it's a likely scenario. If she were to have been raped and managed to run away from the person who abducted her, they would have panicked and used whatever they could have found to stop her. Perhaps a tire iron. I can't say for certain on any of these things, as I'm only going off the information on 2 websites, both of which have basically the same information, but it's important to speculate and theorize. Of course, if you know who committed this crime or have a tip you believe can help, please contact Crime Stoppers at 907-561-7867. This is the first case that had an article written about it in the Anchorage Daily News. Ian Bobbich, who was 29 years old, was shot and killed outside his apartment building sometime between 11 and 11:30 p.m. on October 24, 2016. The police say they received many calls about 4 or 5 shots that were heard around this time. When they arrived around midnight, they found Ian dead. Aside from a seemingly unrelated non-fatal shooting that took place around 10:30 that same night, the case has seen no leads. In the shooting that took place beforehand, the shooter and the victim were both interviewed and no charges were filed. The two apparently knew each other, and the shots were fired after an argument broke out. I would say it's safe to say that these two events aren't related. With that said, there isn't much more to go off of. Ian wasn't known to have any enemies, and he had just started a new job as an HVAC contractor. According to residents of Government Hill, the area is known as quiet and safe. One man said it's a community where everyone greets each other while walking down the street, and children are okay to play outside for an extended period of time unsupervised. As far as theories go for this one, there are none online, but I have one. Given the time of the crime, very late at night, someone could have approached him in an attempt to rob him. Ian may have attempted to put up a fight, leading into the robber firing out of a panic. I implore you to theorize in the comments as well and really get a discussion started. Also, if you have any tips or know who took Ian's life, please do not hesitate to inform the police at 907-561-7867. Police of Anchorage and the family of Ian have pulled together $5,000 as a reward for anyone that can lead them to an arrest. This case is a bit more graphic than the previous ones, but it does have slightly more information as well. It was June 18th, 2003 when 2 teenage boys in Beluga Point, Alaska came across the torso of Desiree. Yes, only her torso. They of course reported it to police, and over a year later, it was identified as Desiree, who had gone missing in 2001. Even though they knew who it was, they were not able to determine the cause of death or if she'd been dismembered before being dropped off where she was found. Desiree wasn't given the easiest life. At only 14 years old, her mother kicked her out of the house, citing Desiree and her stepfather were not getting along. Furthermore, Desiree told close friends that she'd been raped at age 13. While no charges have ever been brought upon the stepfather, many believe it was him who did it. Desiree, while living on the streets, began staying with a man named Daniel Bushy, who was 26 years old. According to reports, he was an alcoholic, and the same year he met Desiree, he crashed his car into another while driving intoxicated. Everyone in the other car was killed, and Daniel attempted to frame Desiree for it. Sometime later, Desiree began working as a police informant at the age of 18. This would continue until her and her boyfriend at the time, 40-year-old Tony Shivers, attempted to take a bag of cocaine from a sale. The two would eventually split, leading Desiree to work in prostitution and eventually exotic dancing, where she met Jim Chaplin, who was 39 years old. From reports online, the two were together for a short time and allegedly engaged, but it's not confirmed. They would eventually split up, however, and get a restraining order on each other. It was Jim Chaplin who reported her missing in December of 2001. As far as leads go in this case, the only one police have led to dead ends. A man by the name of Joseph Boehm said that he had information on Desiree's murder in 2004. police reached a plea agreement with him for the information to lessen his sentence on his sex trafficking charge. Unfortunately, it leads to nothing. Joseph passed away in 2014. During the time of Desiree's discovery, the torso of Michelle Roth was also discovered in the same location as Desiree's. Police believe the two cases are related, but there are no leads for either. If you have any information on who could have done this to these women, please call Crime Stoppers at 907-561-7867. Jael Hamblin was only 20 years old when she left her 7-month-old son Joel with her roommate before saying she was leaving for the weekend on October 11th, 2014. Her son is now in the care of his grandmother. Jael hasn't been seen since she left that day. In interviews with Jael's mother, she said that Jael suffered from many things brought on by fetal alcohol syndrome. One of these things includes poor decision-making. According to Jael's mother, Jael was seduced by a 30-year-old woman at the age of 17. This woman would eventually become her roommate. Jael's mother believes that this woman could have something to do with the disappearance. In a statement to KTVA, Jael's mother said, "When my daughter had the baby and he was just a couple months old, she wanted to move out." She then went on to say, "This woman threatened to kill her and said, 'If you ever leave, I'm going to kill you and take the baby.'" Jael's mother even went as far to report the woman as a sexual predator, but according to her, the claim was ignored. KTVA did talk to the woman, but as of now, she isn't considered a suspect, and so her name has not been released. KTVA ran a small story on the case 2 years after Jael went missing, but as of now, nothing new has come up.
Closure remains out of reach for Colleen Vague.
As time goes on, it does not get easier. It just changes focus.
She's taking care of Jael's son, Joel, who was 7 months old when his mom disappeared. Vague says Joel deserves to know what happened and wants people with information to talk to police.
So if you have any information you believe can lead to an arrest or finding Jael, please do not hesitate to call the police at 907-561-7867. I want to give a quick thank you to everyone who took the time to listen to these cases. It's heartbreaking that many of them have so little information, but don't let that discourage you. Many, many cases have found closure, and these that we spoke of have chances as well. Again, if you have any information on any of the cases we touched on, please contact the correct authorities at 907-561-7867. Thank you again for listening, and please, stay safe out there. There's something mesmerizing and strangely inviting about the bitter cold of Canada, especially in the wintertime. The blankets of snow bring out thoughts of curling next to a fireplace and enjoying some hot chocolate. Maybe that's just me, but to my surprise, there are some individuals from Canada that have hearts just as cold and frigid as the winters they endure. Here are 3 cases of Canadian serial killers. Gilbert Jordan was the first person in Canada history to use alcohol as a means of killing someone. He was born in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada on December 12, 1931. By 1952, when he was in his 20s, he was committing various crimes. The numerous charges on his records included DUI, hit and run, car theft, abduction, indecent assault, and rape. He would serve many years for the various offenses, but nothing compared to what he would start doing in 1965. As we stated, Gilbert became known for killing women by bringing their blood alcohol level, or BAL, to a fatal amount. Gilbert himself was known to drink over 50 ounces of vodka a day, so he could definitely hold his own. This is one advantage he had towards the women he targeted. Speaking of, his targets were primarily Aboriginal women located in Vancouver's east side. Most of his victims were found in bars and would later be taken to his barber shop or a hotel for more drinks and occasionally sex. His first known victim was a switchboard operator by the name of Ivy Rose. The two met at a bar in 1965 and would head to a Vancouver hotel later that night. The two would continue to drink until she passed out. While she was unconscious, Gilbert poured more alcohol down her throat. She was found dead the next morning, and an autopsy revealed her BAL to be 0.51. The limit in which you're considered intoxicated is only 0.08. Despite the fact Gilbert was the last known person to see her, he wasn't charged in her death. Gilbert would eventually be traced back to many cases of alcohol poisoning, but it wasn't until October 12, 1987 that he was brought up as a suspect in the killings. A woman was found on the floor of a hotel in Niagara after spending the night with Jordan. Her name was Vanessa Lee Buckner, and while the reports vary as to whether she was Aboriginal or not, it's clear she had an alcoholic addiction. Not long before meeting Gilbert, she lost custody to her newborn child because it was born with an alcoholic dependency. Jordan would use this to his advantage and supplied copious amounts of alcohol to Vanessa, causing her to pass from alcohol poisoning. Gilbert's fingerprints were discovered at the scene, and only a month later, another woman was found dead in a hotel room. Edna Shade. She too passed due to alcohol poisoning. Gilbert was interviewed about the crime, but wasn't charged with anything involving Vanessa's death. Despite this, the police began surveying him on the same day. Over the span of 2 weeks, police would see Gilbert attempt to pick up Aboriginal women in the Skid Row area of Vancouver. The police would watch the women enter hotel rooms with Gilbert and listen in on his conversations. In one instance, Gilbert was reported saying, "Have a drink. Down the hatch, baby. $20 if you drink it right down. See if you're a real woman. Finish that drink. Finish that drink. Down the hatch. Hurry. Right down. You need another drink? I'll give you $50 if you can take it." Police arrested Gilbert while he was attempting to take the life of another woman on November 23, 1987. When they made it into the hotel room, he was on top of her, forcing the contents of a vodka bottle down her throat. While he was connected to the cases of the women you see on screen now, his 1988 trial only saw him serving 15 years for manslaughter. That was for the death of Vanessa Buckner. Of that 15 years, he would only serve 9 after his sentence was reduced during an appeal hearing. Following his release, he was given strict probation rules which restricted him from leaving Vancouver Island. his crimes would come to an end for a short time, but in 2000 he was charged with sexual assault, assault causing bodily harm, and administering a noxious substance. That, of course, was alcohol. He was arrested once again in 2002 for breaching his probation and consuming alcohol while in the presence of a woman. He was given 15 months and 3 more years of probation. Finally, he was connected to a party where a woman by the name of Barb Berkeley would suffer alcohol poisoning. He would be acquitted for these charges in 2005. Upon this acquittal, police put out a warning about Gilbert, explaining his probation and who to call if he were seen breaking these probation rules. Over the next year, women and police would keep an eye peeled, but he wouldn't come back into the spotlight until his death in July of 2006. Clifford Olson was born on January 1st, 1940, in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. It seems that he was a troubled man from the start, as he was often seen as a bully all through school. Later, when he was 17, his arrest records began stacking rapidly. Over 24 years, Clifford would gain 94 separate arrests, ranging from things like armed robbery all the way to sexual assault. While he was in prison serving time, he was even worse. He was an informer for the guards, a homosexual rapist, and coaxed another inmate, Gary Marcoux, into writing up a confession for the rape and murder of a 9-year-old girl. Once he was done serving his time around 1980, he continued to work for law enforcement as an informer and stayed with his mother. It was in November of that year the first girl went missing. Christine Weller, a 12-year-old girl from Surrey, British Columbia, was taken on November 17, 1980. Her body wouldn't be found until over a month later on Christmas Day. She was strangled, raped, and stabbed numerous times. In April of the next year, Colleen Dagnalt, who was 13, went missing along with Farron Todd Johnsrud, who was 16 years old. Colleen's body was missing for 5 months, and Farron's for only 2 weeks. Then on May 19, 1981, Sandra Wolfensteiner was killed, and that following day, Anita Court, who was 13 years old, was also killed. Police knew they had a serial killer on their hands, however, it was near impossible to get 2 steps ahead. The bodies continued piling up when in July of 1981, 6 more young men and women went missing. Simon Parrington, Judy Cosma, Raymond King II, Seagram Arndt, Terry Lynn Carson, and finally, Luis Chartrand. All of Clifford's victims ranged from 12 to 18 years old. Fortunately, he was arrested the month following the abductions and killings on suspicion of attempts to abduct another woman. On the 25th of August, only 13 days after his arrest, Olson was charged with the murder of Julie Cosma. The following cases against him had very strong evidence, but Clifford managed to convince the judge to pay out $10,000 US to his wife for each of the victims' bodies he led police to. After the 10th body was found, police put an end to it, even though he claimed there to be 20 more. He was given 11 consecutive life sentences and passed away from cancer in September of 2011. Elizabeth graduated from London Baptist College in 1991 with a degree in counseling. She would go on to graduate from Conesta College 4 years later with a degree in nursing. Sometime later in 2007, she began work with Crescent Care, a nursing home in the Woodstock area, for 7 years. Over these 7 years, many elderly men and women who were under her care suspiciously passed away. They ranged from 75 to 96 years old. It began with James Silcox, who was 84 years old. He passed away in Woodstock on August 17, 2007, due to an insulin overdose. Insulin that was administered by Elizabeth. In her confession, she wrote, "James was not diabetic. That evening I had the urge to overdose James. I was angry that he was so inappropriate. At approximately 9:30 p.m., I decided to overdose him with insulin, hoping he would die." Later in the confession, she claimed she would return to his room multiple times to administer more insulin. It was during this time James said things to her like, "I'm sorry, and I love you." She said she cried as she overdosed him. This would be the common sentiment across the following 7 victims. Those include Maurice Garant, 84, Gladys Millard, 87, Helen Matheson, 95, Mary Zarowinski, 96, Helen Young, 90, Maureen Pickering, and Arpad Havaroth, who was 75 years old. Arpad, who went by Art, was the only victim not at Crescent Care. He was staying at Meadow Park when he was injected with insulin. In her confession, Wetlaufer wrote, "Art was physically abusive to the staff. He would pinch and hit. One evening, I decided enough was enough. I felt angry, frustrated, vindictive, and energized. I gave Art 8 OU of short-acting insulin and 6 OU of long-acting insulin at approximately 8 p.m. During the night, he had a stroke and died 4 to 5 days later." Art was also not diabetic. Elizabeth was arrested after confessing to multiple doctors at the facility and filing for emergency psychiatric care in October of 2016. She was eventually sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole.
His reaction to it?
He fought it.
Did he?
Yeah, but he fought everything.
Did you ever speak to these people when you were rejecting them?
No.
Would you ever say anything to them?
The devil. And part of me thought it might be God. And I am sorry. I'm sorry for what the families went through at the time. And I'm extremely sorry for what they're going to go through. It's awful.
If you could say something to them, what would you say to them?
What can you say to them that would matter? I'm sorry isn't enough.
I want to take a minute to thank everyone for watching. If you enjoyed, hello everyone and welcome to the newest edition of the Cold Cases from Every State series. Tonight we're going to be covering 5 cases from Idaho. Not going to waste any time, we're just going to jump right into it. The first case is that of Stephanie Lynn Crane. October 11th, 1993 was the day the small community of Challis, Idaho was shaken to the core. It was that day 9-year-old Stephanie Crane went missing. She hasn't been seen since. It began with Stephanie's mother, Sandy, dropping her off at the Challis bowling alley with some of her close friends. From there, the group spent some time inside before leaving at 6 p.m. They were said to have last been seen walking towards Challis High School down Highway 93 at this time. It isn't clear where she was heading. It could have been the school for soccer practice or her family's home, which was only 500 yards away. About 9 p.m., 3 hours since the last sighting of Stephanie, her parents notified police, and they began the search. The police were thorough in their search, looking into every possibility. 7,000 square miles were covered across 2 counties, but nothing was found. The only lead they had was the reports of a yellow pickup truck with red stripes being seen near where the last sighting was. Even then, they can't be certain that this truck was connected in any way. One man, Keith Glenn Hescock, was a person of interest for quite some time, as he was always suspected in the kidnapping of Amber Hopes. Keith also kidnapped a 14-year-old girl from her home in 2002. She was luckily able to escape his home after he left for work, despite her being chained to the bed. The police headed over to his workplace to arrest him, but he led them on a 40-mile chase that ended with an officer being wounded, a K-9 unit being killed, and Keith committing suicide. Other things of note is that Keith knew Stephanie's family and owned a truck similar to the one seen the day that she was kidnapped. Furthermore, family members said he was hunting in the Chalice area around that time. A $50,000 reward was put in place by the Custer County Commissioners for any information that leads to an arrest in this case, but still, nothing came up. To this day, despite hundreds of volunteers and even the FBI getting involved, Stephanie or her remains haven't been located. Both of her parents have passed away, but many of her family members are searching for answers. If you believe you have information in this case that can lead to her being located or someone being convicted, don't hesitate to report it. You can do so with any of the numbers listed on screen right now. Our next case is the remains in Civil Defense Cave. It was in 1979, a family in Idaho were searching for arrowheads in Civil Defense Cave located in East Idaho. While down there, they made an incredibly shocking discovery, a male torso. Adding to the mystery, the remains were mummified and wrapped in burlap. The remains were reported and the area was searched, but the arms and legs weren't found for another 12 years. The head has still yet to be located. The John Doe was sent to the Jeffersonian, where they determined it to be male and believed the doe was dismembered by a saw. Other than this, anthropologists and forensic scientists are at a loss. The doe was being held at the Jeffersonian for research, but has since been moved to ISU, where it remains to this day. The doe is used to teach students about anthropology. Dating the bones has placed them somewhere within the last 5 years. However, this could be wrong. The clothing with the body was said to be from the 1960s or 1970s. Amy Michael, a former ISU assistant professor, is working to get Doe's remains identified, but recently they've run out of the necessary funds to take the next steps. That being reaching out to the DNA Doe project that could extract genetic material from the bones and trace down lineage. The lead investigator at the DNA Doe project, Anthony Redgrave, said this: "Using autosomal DNA comparison, which is what is used by forensic genealogists, a file can be uploaded to GEDmatch that will produce a list of potentially hundreds of cousins with which we can build an extensive family tree." He continues, "By triangulating segments of matching DNA to common ancestors, we can determine how all of these cousins are related to the unidentified person, and home in on the family group where we may find our John Doe. Along with this, the area around the discovery is also being searched when time permits. John Clements, the Clark County Chief Deputy, and one other officer are in the process of covering 1,765 square miles in search of any evidence. John Clements says there's one thing that he would like to look into though, and it could possibly lead to an identification of the doe. In the 1970s, 2 men got into a bar fight. Later that same night, the house they lived in caught fire. It's been reported that one of the men, Martin Malady, impeded the fire trucks, although it isn't clear how. The other man, John Green, was never seen after this. Now, while there is no record of someone with that name living in Du Bois, Clements believed it could still be connected. Martin Malady has since passed away, but he had quite a record before that, mostly theft and check fraud. Again, there is no evidence connecting either of the men to the doe found in the cave, but John Green was said to be of Spanish or Basque descent. A DNA profile would help to see if the remains have any ancestors with these traits and could identify the doe. But as I said, the funds are running low. If you're interested in donating, follow the link I've provided in the top comments. That will take you to the DNA Doe project for this case, where you can donate. If you have any information on the case that you think can help, contact the police at the number you see here. Next up is the case of Kyle Frank Tolley. August 17, 2001 was the last night Kyle was seen alive. His brother, a close friend, and his friend's wife were all camping in Boise County in the Pine Flats area. The day after Kyle went missing, the 18th, police made their way to the campsite, where everyone was arrested on drug charges. Everyone there was still under the influence and said to be hallucinating, so it's safe to assume Kyle was as well. Once the group sobered up, they were able to explain that Kyle ran off into the woods, saying he was going to find a McDonald's to get some food. He never returned. His wallet and $300 in cash was found at the campsite. Police assumed he'd hitchhiked out of the area, and Kyle's parents waited 2 years to file a missing persons report, saying that he was a transient and would go missing for extended periods of time on a regular basis. A large search was done of the Pine Flats area in 2013, but nothing of note was found. There were 2 cadaver dogs used in the search as well, and while they alerted to remains, they were later determined to be those of a deer. To this day, it is unclear if Kyle made it out of the woods alive, was attacked by an animal, or hitchhiked out of the area like police initially believed. The first 2 years following his disappearance, nothing was done about it, despite police knowing he was under the influence when he went missing and was a danger to himself. If you have any information you believe can help police in this case, call the number that you see on screen right now. Next is the case of Kristen Dunlap. October 14, 1994 was the last time Kristen was seen by anyone. At the time, she was seeing a man named Charles Castro, who also went by Corey. Kristen was only 17 at the time, while Charles was 27. It's said that he was married to Kristen and possibly abusive, and he was one of the last people to see her before she disappeared. Now, some 24 years later, Charles is a registered sex offender, and Kristen has yet to be found. Police are classifying her as a runaway, claiming she left on her own accord, but if she was in an abusive relationship, I could see that playing a large part into her leaving, whether it was with Charles or not. Everything I've presented here is the only information. Every site I find talking about the case regurgitates the same info and sometimes just copy and paste it. I can't find any news articles about Kristen either. There are none matched to her name in the records kept on newspapers.com, a site with millions of archived articles and papers. It seems like Kristen has been forgotten, so I ask that if you have even the slightest bit of information, don't hesitate on reporting it to the phone number that you see on screen right now. Finally, I want to touch on the case of Dior Kunz. Dior was only 2 years old when he went missing in July of 2015. Dior and his family were on a camping trip in Lemhi County where the young man was said to have gone missing. His parents and grandfather were reported to be the only people present when he went missing. Another man, Isaac, who was a friend of Dior's grandfather, was also there, but only for 1 day. From reports, the events played out like this. The day Dior went missing, July 10th, his mother Jessica had left the campsite to purchase feminine products for the trip, although other sources say she went fishing with Dior Sr. Isaac and Dior's father, Dior Sr., I'll be referring to him as Sr. from this point forward for clarity, left to go fishing, leaving Dior in the care of Bob, his grandfather. When Sr. and Isaac returned, Dior was not there. Bob explained he'd last seen him playing with some toys under a tree only 10 minutes after they left. Jessica came back to the campsite, and Dior was reported missing. The search began immediately, and over 200 volunteers showed up to aid in the search. Nothing was found. Now, 4 years later, all we have are various theories. The first theory is that of an animal attack. However, I believe the grandfather would have heard something like that taking place. Dior was only a few yards away from him. And as other people, including the police, have pointed out, Dior was wearing cowboy boots that were too big for him. If an animal were to drag him away, they would have most likely fallen off. Next, some are saying the boy was abducted, but I find that very unlikely as well. I'm not sure how easily someone can sneak a 2-year-old out of a camping ground and not be seen. Unless someone reports to the contrary, this theory to me holds no water. The final 2 theories are unfortunately 2 that make the most sense. It was either a tragic accident or a premeditated homicide. It began with Sheriff Bowerman in October of 2016. He made a statement saying this:
"We've given them too many opportunities to tell us what happened if it was an accident, and there's been no interest in going that direction. So that tells me there's only one other possibility. It has to be a homicide."
The family was of course shocked by this and continued to deny having any involvement with the disappearance and possibly death of Dior. In an attempt to disclose all the rumors around their name, they hired a private investigator, Philip Klein. 6 weeks after his investigation, he came to them and said he believed that they were suspects in the case. With that said, Klein has said to have never provided the information that led him to this conclusion. The family eventually filed a lawsuit on the PI and hired another in April of 2019, David Marshburn. It was David that made one of the biggest breaks in the case so far. Using his specially trained cadaver dogs, he drove to the Timber Creek campground and began his search. Only 3 days later, the dogs gave a hard alert on one part of the campground. This would indicate human remains. In a KTVB interview, he explained that while this does mean there are remains there, he can't say if they are those of Dior. As he says, that's up to the sheriff's office. With that said, they are searching the area. However, I haven't seen any updates on this case past this. As far as the case against the grandfather's friend Isaac, Dior's mother believes he had something to do with it. In a special report done by KTVB, she explains that he did not aid in the search, was drinking at the campsite, and factory reset his phone numerous times. She also said Isaac was upset about Dior being out there, saying a 2-year-old shouldn't go camping. Isaac spoke to KTVB as well, saying there was 4 adults up there, and for some reason, none of them know what went down. Somebody does, but I can't point fingers at somebody when I don't know. Of course, this case is wide open, and police are still searching for evidence that can lead to an arrest. No matter who you believe took Dior's life, it's important that there's closure for everyone involved. If you'd like to see an incredibly in-depth look into the case, check out the video done by my close friend, That Chapter. If you do have any information you believe can help investigators, call any of the numbers you see on screen right now. I want to take a second to say thank you to everyone for taking some time out of your day to watch this